The early life of Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler's early years were marked by a series of struggles and personal conflicts that would later shape his destiny. Born in 1889 in Austria, in the town of Braunau am Inn, near the German border, his father, Alois, was a strict and demanding man who worked in the customs service. He had high hopes for his son, wishing Adolf to follow in his footsteps and become a civil servant. But from a young age, Adolf had different dreams. At 6 years old, Adolf entered public school in the village of Fischlum, a small town near Linz. This marked the beginning of a restless childhood, as the family moved several times. Between the ages of 6 and 15, Hitler experienced 7 different addresses and attended 5 different schools. These constant relocations, however, didn't seem to trouble him much, as he later recalled. His father, retired at 58, became increasingly restless, moving from one place to another in the Linz region. For 2 years, Hitler attended a Benedictine monastery school in Lambach, where his father had bought a farm. It was there that young Adolf showed an interest in singing, even dreaming of becoming a priest. However, this idea clashed with his father's ambitions for him. Alois saw religion as a poor career choice, and he was determined his son would pursue a more practical profession, civil service. By the time Adolf was 11, his father had enrolled him in high school at Linz, hoping it would lead to a steady government job. Adolf, however, had different aspirations. He resented the idea of being stuck in an office, filling out forms and living a life of routine. He wanted to become a painter. When he revealed this ambition to his father, it caused a massive rift between them. Alois reacted with disbelief, refusing to support his son's artistic dreams. This clash with his father became a defining moment in Adolf's life, and it was something he later recounted in his autobiography Mein Kampf. His rebellion against his father's wishes fueled his determination and stubbornness, traits that would become his defining characteristics later in life. He was willing to defy his father's authority at any cost, even if it meant failing at school. As Adolf's resistance grew, his grades started to slip. Though he had been a good student early on, his academic performance deteriorated. He stopped caring about his schoolwork, hoping that his father would see his poor marks and allow him to pursue his dream of becoming an artist. In the end, Adolf was expelled from the Linz High School due to his poor grades and lack of discipline. He briefly transferred to another school instead, but left before graduating. Despite his failure in the classroom, Hitler's future path was already being shaped by experiences outside of school. He later looked back on his school days with disdain, especially toward his teachers. He believed they were narrow-minded, uncreative, and lacked the vision to understand his potential. In his later speeches and writings, he ridiculed the academic system and blamed his poor education on the inadequacies of his teachers. Among the few teachers he spoke positively of was Dr. Leopold Poch, his history teacher at Linz. Poch was a passionate nationalist who introduced Hitler to the idea of historical struggle and the importance of national pride. Under Poch's influence, history became Adolf's favorite subject, and it was here that his nationalist ideas began to form. Hitler often spoke of Poch's classes as moments of personal revelation, where he became aware of the power of history and the importance of the German nation. By the time Adolf was 14, his father died suddenly of a lung hemorrhage. This loss affected him deeply, but his mother, Clara, became a comforting figure in his life. Though she was a more indulgent parent, Adolf remained determined not to follow the path his father had laid out for him. He continued to pursue his dream of becoming an artist, a pursuit that led him to Vienna in the following years. After Alois's death, Hitler's mother moved with him and his younger sister, Paula, to a small apartment in Linz, with his father's financial support gone. Adolf's future seemed uncertain. He briefly fell ill, which led him to take time off from school. This illness was a turning point in his life, as it gave him a chance to reconsider his future. Upon his recovery, he decided once and for all that he would not return to school, but rather focus on pursuing a career as an artist, much to his mother's sorrow. Despite the support of his mother, Adolf struggled to make a living as an artist in Vienna. His dreams of entering the prestigious Academy of Fine Arts were shattered when he was rejected twice. This rejection, coupled with the isolation and poverty he faced in Vienna, marked the beginning of a darker period in his life. It was here that he would develop many of the views and beliefs that would later drive him to power. The saddest period of my life. The years between 1909 and 1913 were some of the most miserable of Adolf Hitler's life. He had come to Vienna from Linz with grand dreams, yet instead found himself trapped in a cycle of hardship and isolation. This period, though, occurred in a city that appeared to be the epitome of joy and culture to those who lived in or visited it. Vienna was a city where music and art filled the air, from the masterpieces of Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven to the waltzes of Johann Strauss. The city was beautifully set along the Danube River, with its hills and vineyards creating a picturesque scene. In Vienna, life seemed to be one long celebration, coffee houses where people chatted and flirted, theatres filled with opera and operetta, and streets alive with dancing and music. Despite this vibrant atmosphere, not everyone shared in the city's prosperity. Like all cities, Vienna had its poor, struggling to survive in squalid conditions. But, as the industrial hub of Central Europe, Vienna was relatively prosperous, and this wealth trickled down to some degree. The lower middle class had a strong influence on the city's politics, with a rising social democratic movement and growing labor unions, signaling changes in the old power structures. Yet, while opportunities were available for those willing to work, Hitler, now a penniless young man, struggled to fit in. Though he had the chance to apply to the Academy of Fine Arts or pursue a trade, Hitler showed no interest. Instead, he chose to live a life of vagabondage. His days were spent doing odd jobs, shoveling snow, running errands, or working as a laborer. By late 1909, he had to leave his modest room in the city, and for the next several years, he lived in cheap flop houses and men's hostels, struggling with hunger and relying on the charity of the city's soup kitchens to survive. This was the environment in which Hitler spent some of the most formative years of his life. In later years, Hitler would recall this time with bitterness. He described Vienna, a city of beauty and culture for others, as the saddest period of his life, full of hardship, hunger, and misery. For him, Vienna represented 5 years of constant struggle just to survive. Hunger, he said, was his constant companion, a faithful bodyguard who never left him. Despite his dire circumstances, Hitler never sought steady work or a regular career. He feared becoming one of the manual laborers he looked down on. Instead, he continued to drift, occasionally doing some artistic work. He took up drawing crude watercolors of Vienna's landmarks, such as St. Stephen's Cathedral and the Opera House. These paintings were not works of true artistry. Rather, they were rough and lifeless, often copied from older works. He sold them cheaply, mostly to merchants and furniture makers, who used them to decorate walls or backs of chairs. The young Hitler was far from the artist he would later claim to be, but he still believed in his creative abilities. He looked the part of a bohemian. His shabby black overcoat, greasy hat, and unkempt hair made him stand out among the other young men in Vienna. His life was solitary, and although he avoided smoking, drinking, and women, he was not without ambition. He spent hours reading, immersing himself in books on history, politics, and culture. His reading, though, was more about absorbing ideas than developing a deeper understanding. He was selective in what he read, often skipping over things that didn't align with his emerging worldview. In his autobiography, Mein Kampf, Hitler would later describe this period as one of intense learning. He believed that he had acquired all the knowledge he needed to shape his future actions. It was during these years in Vienna that he formulated his worldviews, which he believed were the foundation for his later life. These ideas, while still crude, would shape his future decisions and rise to power. For Hitler, Vienna was more than just a city. It was a crucible that shaped his philosophy and vision. It was here that he first encountered the struggles of the working class and began to form the racial and nationalistic beliefs that would drive his later actions. Despite his suffering, he saw his time in Vienna as invaluable, as it was where his ideological foundation was laid, ideas he would carry with him throughout his life. The budding ideas of Adolf Hitler. The ideas that Adolf Hitler would later develop into his infamous ideology were, for the most part, not original. They were absorbed, raw, from the turbulent political and social environment of early 20th century Austria. This was a time when the Austro-Hungarian Empire was in its final years, struggling to maintain control over a diverse collection of ethnic groups. The German Austrians, a minority in the empire, had historically ruled over a patchwork of nationalities, imposing their language and culture. However, this dominance was crumbling by the 1900s. The Italians had already broken away in 1848, and in 1867 the Hungarians gained political equality under the dual monarchy. By the time Hitler was coming of age, the various Slavic groups, Czechs, Slovaks, Serbs, Croats, and others, were pushing for greater autonomy and equal rights, which only intensified the growing tensions. The political landscape was further complicated by social unrest. The disenfranchised working classes were demanding the vote, the right to organize, and better conditions. This led to the granting of universal male suffrage and the weakening of the political influence of the German Austrians, who were a minority in the Austrian half of the empire. These shifts were a source of great frustration for Hitler, who saw the empire as falling apart into what he called a Vollmorass. He believed that only by reasserting German dominance, especially over the non-German Slavs, particularly the Czechs, could the empire be saved. To Hitler, the solution was a return to authoritarianism, with the Germans at the top, and the abolishment of the democratic reforms that were taking root. Though he did not participate in politics directly, Hitler followed the activities of Austria's major political parties, the Social Democrats, the Christian Socialists, and the Pan-German Nationalists. As he observed their successes and failures, he began to develop a keen political insight that would eventually make him a master manipulator in German politics. Social Democrats, a bitter rivalry. Hitler's initial response to the Social Democrats was one of intense hostility. In Mein Kampf, he describes the party's hostile attitude towards Germanism, accusing it of pandering to the Slavic comrade and undermining the racial purity of the German people. His disdain was profound, but even then, he recognized that the Social Democrats had managed to build a mass movement, a key element of any successful political campaign. He observed how they effectively used propaganda and mass demonstrations to rally support, something Hitler would later adopt for his own purposes. Hitler was particularly interested in what he termed the spiritual and physical terror that the Social Democrats used against their political enemies. He admired their ability to discredit opponents with slander and to break the resolve of their adversaries with relentless psychological pressure. He saw this as a calculated technique, one that could be applied with almost mathematical certainty to weaken his political rivals. The Pan-German nationalists and their mistakes. In Vienna, Hitler was also drawn to the Pan-German Nationalist Party, founded by Georg Ritter von Schönerer. This movement advocated for German supremacy within the Austro-Hungarian Empire, echoing many of Hitler's own beliefs. He embraced its virulent nationalism, anti-Semitism, and opposition to socialism. However, Hitler quickly identified flaws in the movement, particularly its inability to mobilize the masses. He also believed that their opposition to the Catholic Church had alienated crucial supporters. Hitler would later recognize the importance of the Church in maintaining the loyalty of the people, and would never make the same mistake when establishing the Nazi Party. Moreover, the pan-German nationalists failed to win the support of the established institutions of power, an era Hitler would be determined not to repeat. He understood that, in order for a political movement to succeed, it needed the backing of powerful institutions like the military, the church, or the state. These lessons would prove invaluable when he came to power in Germany. Karl Lueger, the model politician. The figure who most influenced Hitler's political development in Vienna was Dr. Karl Lueger, the leader of the Christian Social Party and the longtime mayor of Vienna. Lueger was a shrewd politician who knew how to appeal to the lower middle classes and how to harness anti-Semitic sentiment for political gain. Though Lueger's version of anti-Semitism was more moderate than Hitler's, Hitler admired his political acumen, particularly his ability to secure support from the masses while keeping in line with established institutions, including the Catholic Church. Hitler saw in Lueger a model of how to balance populism with institutional backing. However, he resented Lueger's tolerance of Jews and his lack of commitment to pan-Germanism. Still, Hitler could not ignore Lueger's successes. Lueger's ability to sway the masses and manage political institutions would be a blueprint for Hitler's later rise to power. Oratory, the power of the spoken word. One key element of Hitler's future political success was his recognition of the power of oratory. He was deeply influenced by Lueger's ability to move crowds with his speeches and recognized that the masses could only be stirred by the power of the spoken word. For Hitler, this was a lesson he would internalize completely. He believed that political movements succeeded not through intellectual debates or written word, but through emotional appeals that could incite volcanic eruptions of human passion. Hitler would go on to become one of history's most infamous orators, using his speeches to rally millions of Germans to his cause. By the time Hitler moved to Munich and began to shape the future of the Nazi Party, the ideas he had nurtured in Vienna, nationalism, anti-Semitism, the need for mass movements, and the importance of political propaganda and oratory were fully formed. He was ready to bring them to fruition in the chaotic political environment of post-World War I Germany, where he would ultimately rise to power.